Hi everyone, my name is Erika Tucker and I work with the Milwaukee Public Museum and the Biodiversity Outreach Network. Today I'd like to talk about responsible use of museum and collection specimens and how we give credit to these institutions, their staff, and their specimens. I know that this workshop may be the first time you've ever really thought about recognizing or acknowledging a collection that you borrowed specimens from, so let's start at the beginning. What am I talking about? Responsible museum specimen use can mean many things, but in this context, I mean giving credit to museums for borrowing, examining, or otherwise using their specimens or data in publications, reports, websites, or any other published documentation. As I'm sure you all know, museums and collections provide a wealth of different resources to the research community, including things like specimens for examination, digital materials, highly specialized entomological and taxonomic expertise, and of course, a place to deposit vouchers from your own research once it's completed. All of these things can greatly facilitate research and are often given out at little or no cost to the researcher requesting them. Despite providing these resources, museums and the people that work in them rarely receive any credit for their specimens or their efforts. Which brings us to the question of why. Besides just wanting to be scientifically responsible, why should you acknowledge museums in your research? Museums provide a variety of essential services to the community, just some of which include providing loans of physical specimens and filling other data requests, keeping specimens that are housed in the collection taxonomically updated, which is no small feat since insect taxonomy is frequently changing, working on digitizing specimens and materials in the collection so that data is more readily accessible, supporting staff that provide highly specialized knowledge and skills that are often difficult to find elsewhere, providing constant maintenance for the specimens in their care with things like pest prevention and environmental controls, and frequently trying to grow, improve, and expand their collections, which in turn provides researchers with even more potential material for study. All of these services take a great deal of time, expertise, and funding, for which museums ask for very little in return, just a little acknowledgement. And believe it or not, making sure museums are properly acknowledged for their help and the specimens or related data that they provide for your research is actually mutually beneficial. Museum acknowledgement can actually make you look good, not just to your peers, but also to journals and funding agencies, and can help enhance your professional reputation. Acknowledging the museums you work with can actually facilitate additional collaborations with both museums and other researchers. It can also lead to the production of new museum resources or easier access to current museum resources, which may allow future research to be more in-depth or more efficient. And then there is sustainability. Acknowledging museums for the part they played in your research can help keep a museum's doors open for future research, both for you and for later generations as well. Okay, so now that we're all on the same page about the benefits of acknowledging museums for their specimens and data, how exactly do you go about it? While there are many ways that you can credit museums, some of the most common ways include an acknowledgement statement, authorship in a published document, a formal citation in the references section of a publication, and acknowledgement in the funding section of your work. An acknowledgement in the acknowledgement section is probably the most common way to acknowledge museums historically, and it's often all a museum will ever ask for. Make sure that you include the institution's full name and abbreviation, the full name of the staff member you worked with, an ORC ID for the staff member you worked with, if they have one, and what was used in your research. It really takes very little effort on your part, and it can be pretty short and simple. Another way to acknowledge museums and their staff for the resources they provide is by offering authorship on any publications that result from your research. This can really help out the staff member you were working with if they have a publications quota to meet, and they can often provide additional helpful feedback as well. Do make sure that you ask someone before adding them as an author. While most museum staff appreciate such an offer, not everyone actually wants authorship or considers it useful for them or their collection. If you do include museum staff as authors, make sure that you include the museum's information and not just the greater institution's information, if they're different. You can also acknowledge museums by giving them a citation in the reference section of your publications. Citations are so important in our community, and as researchers, we do this for pretty much every other thing out there: publications, communications, websites, databases. So why don't we do this for museums? It's actually a lot easier to do than you may think. In the methods section, or any other section where you talk about the specimens or data you used, just cite the museums that provided you with specimens or data like you would any other source. Then add the reference to your reference section. In the reference section, make sure you include the full name of the museum, as well as any abbreviations you may have used within the main text. Accession, catalog numbers, or other unique specimen identifiers are also important to include. If you are dealing with a large list of catalog numbers, as I know many of us are, you may want to include a range or a couple ranges of catalog numbers instead of listing each individually in the reference section. Keep in mind, though, that a full list of catalog numbers does need to be included somewhere, either in the main paper or as a supplemental document. You could also add an overarching taxon name along with the catalog numbers if you want to. Make sure that you include the loan number or transaction ID that the museum assigned you. Include the date, whether that's the loan date, online accession date, access date, or the date you visited a collection in person. And include the type of specimen or data that you used and any URL link if using an online resource. Of course, you'll need to make sure the citations are in the specific format needed for the journal you're submitting to, but that's not really that difficult. Just think of the museum's information like a journal article, where the museum is the author, the catalog number is the story's title, the loan number is the journal name, and the date, well, the date is the date. Funding acknowledgement is another method and is actually a really important way to acknowledge museums and their specimens. While it may not always be relevant to your situation, if the specimens or specimen data you used in your research were available to you because of a grant the museum received, like a collecting expedition fund or a digitization grant, please credit the grant or funding source. This really helps ensure grant and funding agencies see that their money was useful in the scientific community, and it improves the chances of the museum or collection receiving additional funds in the future, which of course in turn means more specimens or their data that you may be able to use in the future. Grant numbers can be put in the acknowledgement section along with any other funding sources that you choose to acknowledge. And a last note, when it comes to acknowledging museums for their specimens and data, just ask. Ask the museum staff what the best way is to acknowledge them and their specimens. Every museum is different, and this is the quickest way to find out what is best for them. They may even have a specific protocol or format that you can copy and paste from. And remember to send a copy of your publication once it's out. No matter how you end up acknowledging a museum, getting a copy of the publication for their records is important. If you don't send it to them, they may never see it, or if they do find it, they may not actually be able to access it. Hopefully, I've managed to convince you of the importance of and benefits of responsible museum specimen and data use, as well as given you some ideas on how to actually go about crediting the institutions you work with. or at least given you some food for thought and further discussion. Thank you for listening. I'm happy to take questions in the chat, later in the discussion panel, or feel free to send me an email at any point in time.